Single dad loses job interview helping woman, but she was a billionaire and did something that shocked everyone. Comment giving a rating from 0 to 10 for my story. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I count on your help. The light morning rain turned the streets of downtown Chicago into a gray mirror, reflecting the rush of pedestrians hurrying to their appointments. The 30-year-old single dad adjusted the collar of his shirt, which he'd ironed 3 times the night before, checked the documents in his worn briefcase one last time, and firmly held the small, cool hand of his 4-year-old daughter. The little girl seemed even more fragile that morning, her big eyes observing the chaotic movement around them with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension that would break anyone's heart. He'd woken up at 5 in the morning to make breakfast, choose the best outfit he had, and get everything organized for a day that could change their lives. The job interview was at 9 o'clock at one of the most reputable companies in the area, an opportunity that had arisen after months of sending resumes and receiving only silence in response. The 3 temporary jobs he worked to support his daughter barely covered basic expenses, and he knew he desperately needed something better, something that would give him the stability his little one deserved. They were walking down Michigan Avenue when he saw the scene that would change everything. A woman of about 30 was lying on the sidewalk, surrounded by scattered papers flying in the wind, her elegant clothes stained by dirty gutter water. The stiletto heel of her expensive shoe was broken, and she was trying unsuccessfully to lean on the nearest wall, clearly with a twisted ankle. Her face, even contorted with pain, maintained an impressive beauty that attracted attention, and something in her haughty posture, even in that vulnerable situation, indicated that she wasn't used to asking for help. For a moment, he hesitated. The interview would start in 40 minutes. And he'd calculated every second of the journey to arrive punctually. Missing this opportunity would mean continuing the daily struggle to get enough money for bills, for his daughter's medication, for a minimally decent life. But when he looked at the fallen woman and then at his little girl, who was watching him with eyes that seemed to understand much more than she should for her age, he knew he couldn't just walk past. He let go of his daughter's hand for a moment and ran to the stranger, kneeling beside her without caring that the rain was soaking his clothes even more. She looked at him in surprise as he began to gather the scattered papers, his nimble fingers organizing documents that seemed important, although he couldn't completely understand what they were. There were spreadsheets with impressive numbers, contracts with companies he only knew by name, and business jargon that revealed that this woman was far beyond his social reality. When he offered his arm to help her up, she accepted with gratitude that shone in her dark eyes. The contact between them was electric, an instant connection that neither of them expected to feel. She was taller than she seemed when she was lying down, and even injured, she carried with her a natural elegance that contrasted sharply with his honest simplicity. Her hands were soft, clearly those of someone who had never known manual labor, but there was something genuine in her gaze that reassured him. The little daughter approached timidly, her trembling steps echoing on the wet sidewalk. The unknown woman lowered her eyes to the little girl, and her face transformed completely, the mask of coldness dissolving to give way to a tenderness that she herself seemed surprised to feel. The little girl held the rag doll that was her greatest treasure, a gift her father had given her on her last birthday, and offered it to the injured woman with a shy but genuine smile. Without thinking twice about the consequences for his interview, he decided he couldn't leave her there. He carefully picked her up in his arms, surprised at how light she was despite her height, and began to walk towards the nearest hospital, Northwestern Memorial. The little girl followed them, her small steps trying to keep up with the adults, and he slowed down whenever he noticed she was falling behind. During the journey, the injured woman silently watched how he cared for his daughter, how he encouraged her with sweet words, how he made sure she wasn't afraid. The hospital was crowded that rainy morning, and they had to wait almost 3 hours for her to be seen. During all that time, he remained there, even knowing that he had definitely missed the job interview. He divided the last sandwich he had in his backpack between his daughter and the stranger, invented funny stories to distract them both from the hospital environment, and demonstrated infinite patience, even when the little one began to get restless and tired. The elegant woman watched his every gesture with an attention that went beyond gratitude. There was something about this man that she had never found in her life, surrounded by ambitious executives and people interested only in her social status. The way he took care of his daughter revealed a solid character, a genuine kindness that contrasted with the cold and calculating world she was used to. When the little girl fell asleep in her father's arms, using his jacket as a blanket, the stranger felt something strange stirring in her chest, an emotion she had buried so many years ago that she almost didn't recognize it. When she was finally called for treatment, she discovered that she had only sprained her ankle, nothing serious that wouldn't heal with a few days of rest. Leaving the consulting room and finding them still waiting for her in the waiting room, she was sure that something special had happened that rainy morning. He stood up immediately, his daughter still sleepy in his arms, and asked how she was doing with a sincere concern that touched her deeply. They said goodbye at the hospital door, but something had changed irrevocably for both of them. She couldn't get out of her head the image of that man sacrificing his job opportunity to help a complete stranger, and he couldn't forget the gaze of that mysterious woman who seemed to carry deep secrets. When he got home that night, after explaining to his daughter that the pretty lady was okay and that maybe they would see her again, he realized that he hadn't even asked her name. But somehow that seemed appropriate for that encounter that had been too magical to be real. In the days following the encounter at the hospital, the elegant woman couldn't concentrate on her executive meetings or the financial decisions that usually occupied her mind completely. Sitting in her office on the top floor of the skyscraper that housed the center of her business empire, she looked through the panoramic window and thought about that man who had sacrificed his job interview to help her. Her investments in the stock market continued to yield millions. Her net worth in dollars grew exponentially every quarter, but for the first time in years, none of that seemed to matter. Moved by a curiosity that she herself didn't completely understand, she began to discreetly investigate who that man was. She used her contacts in the hospital area to discover that he had left only an outdated phone number as an emergency reference. But that was enough for her private investigators to trace his identity. What she discovered left her deeply moved, and at the same time ashamed of her own life of privilege. He worked 3 different jobs to support his daughter. Early in the morning, before the sun rose, he cleaned a commercial building downtown. In the afternoon, he worked as a helper in an auto repair shop in the suburbs, returning home with his hands covered in grease and his body aching. On Tuesday and Thursday evenings, he still found the energy to work as a food delivery driver, riding his old bicycle through the dangerous streets of the city to get a few extra dollars that would make a difference in his tight budget. The small apartment where they lived was in a distant working-class neighborhood, in a 4-story building without an elevator, with thin walls that let through all the noises of the neighbors. Even so, he had transformed that tiny space into a welcoming home for his daughter. He had painted the walls with cheerful colors, hung drawings she made at the community daycare, and created a special corner where he kept her few toys as if they were precious treasures. The story of the wife he had lost in an accident 2 years earlier was even more touching. She discovered that the couple had been deeply in love, that they had planned to have more children, build a large and happy family. The accident had happened when the woman was returning from the maternity ward where she worked as a nurse, and since then he had raised the girl alone, without close family to help, without a support network beyond the neighbors who occasionally took care of the little one when he needed to work late. The more she discovered about his life, the more the millionaire was impacted by the strength and determination of that man. He had never asked for government assistance, had never victimized himself or used the difficult situation as an excuse not to fight. He paid all the bills on time, even if it meant eating less, so that his daughter could have adequate nutrition. He took her to the doctor whenever necessary, even if it cost the rent money. He was both father and mother at the same time, and he played both roles with a dedication that she found almost superhuman. That's when she had an idea that would change the course of both their lives. She created a fictitious position in one of her subsidiary companies, a mid-sized company that operated in the logistics area and was always in need of administrative employees. She designed a seemingly legitimate selection process with several stages and interviews, but which in reality was carefully orchestrated so that he would be the chosen candidate. The salary offered was 3 times higher than the sum of his 3 jobs and included complete health insurance, a food allowance, and an internal daycare for employees with small children. When he received the call informing him that he had been approved for the position, he couldn't believe it. For months, he had been sending resumes without receiving even a response. And suddenly a reputable company was offering exactly what he needed to give his daughter a decent life. During the final interview, she was present, disguised as an employee of the Human Resources Department, wearing simple clothes and a posture completely different from her usual business personality. The reunion was electrifying for both of them. He immediately recognized her as the woman he had helped at the hospital, but she pretended it was just a coincidence, that she had recently changed jobs and now worked in that area. The chemistry between them was undeniable, even in that formal office environment. Each question she asked during the interview was an excuse to prolong the conversation, to hear his voice, to observe how his eyes lit up when he talked about the plans he had for his daughter's future. His first days at the company were a period of intense adaptation for both of them. She created reasons to always be around, offering help with the new procedures, explaining how the systems worked, introducing him to colleagues. He, in turn, was dazzled by the opportunity and determined to prove that he deserved that chance. He always arrived half an hour before schedule, left after everyone else had gone home, and treated each task as if it were the most important of his life. The little daughter was radiant in the company daycare. For the first time, she had access to educational toys, activities led by qualified educators, and a balanced diet that complemented what her father could offer at home. She made new friends, participated in artistic activities, and her cognitive development flourished in a way that surprised even the most experienced teachers. During the first weeks, the tension between the 2 adults was palpable. They met in the corridors, and time seemed to stop for a few seconds. They talked about work, but there was always an undercurrent of attraction that neither of them knew how to deal with. She began to appear with small gifts for the girl: a children's storybook, a set of crayons, a teddy bear, always with elaborate excuses about promotions at the store or gifts she had received and didn't need. One afternoon, when heavy rain prevented many employees from returning home at the usual time, they were alone in the office working on an urgent report. The physical proximity, the sound of rain hitting the windows, and the intimate atmosphere created by the low lighting made it impossible to ignore the attraction that was growing between them. When he accidentally touched her hand while picking up the same documents, they both felt an electric shock that left them speechless for long seconds. It was at that moment that she realized she was falling madly in love with that man, and that all her plans to simply help him from afar were crumbling. At the same time, she understood that she was building her relationship on a gigantic lie, hiding not only her true identity, but also the fact that she had manipulated the whole situation to bring him close to her. The guilt began to consume her from the inside, especially when she saw how he treated her with genuine respect as if she were really just a colleague who cared about his well-being. The weeks turned into months, and the relationship between them evolved from colleagues to close friends, always with that latent sexual tension that seemed to electrify the air whenever they were in the same environment. He had become an exemplary employee, respected by everyone in the company, and his dedication to work impressed even the most demanding supervisors. The little one's life had been completely transformed. She now attended the company daycare with enthusiasm, had gained weight, and her radiant smile illuminated the entire environment whenever someone saw her playing in the internal courtyard during lunchtime. The millionaire in disguise watched every detail of this transformation with a mixture of joy and growing guilt. She had started to spend more time at the branch where he worked, creating unnecessary meetings and fictitious projects just to be near him. Their conversations became longer, more personal, and she discovered that behind that hard-working man there was an acute intelligence, a subtle sense of humor, and a worldview that fascinated her deeply. During the lunches, they started having together in the company cafeteria. He told stories about his simple childhood in the countryside, about the dreams he had postponed to take care of his family, about the books he read in the few spare hours he could find. She feigned casual interest, but in reality she was absorbing every word, every facial expression, every gesture that revealed a little more of his complex and captivating personality. The first significant twist happened when the little daughter suddenly fell ill. It was a Thursday afternoon when the daycare teacher called to inform that the girl had a high fever and was vomiting. He was desperate because the company's health insurance was still in the process of being released, and he didn't have enough money for a private hospital. He was ready to take her to the public health center, where he knew they would wait hours for basic care. The millionaire, seeing his despair, acted quickly behind the scenes. She called one of the best pediatricians in the city, a professional who had been serving her family for years, and created an elaborate story about an experimental social program that her company was developing for employees in emergency situations. The doctor, who owed several favors to her family, agreed to see the child immediately in his private clinic, at no cost. When she informed him about the luck of having gotten this special care, he was confused but extremely grateful. During the 3 days that the girl was hospitalized for observation, she appeared at the hospital several times, always with excuses about checking if the company program was working properly. In reality, she had ensured that the child received the best possible treatment, with complete exams, imported medicines, and 24-hour medical monitoring. It was during these visits to the hospital that the connection between them deepened irrevocably. He was vulnerable, scared of losing his daughter as he had lost his wife, and she found herself offering emotional comfort that went far beyond what a work colleague would do. They spent hours talking in the pediatric corridor, she listening to his deepest anxieties and fears, he finding in her a strength and understanding that he didn't expect to receive. When the little one finally recovered completely, he tried to find out more details about the social program that had made the treatment possible. But she always skillfully diverted the subject. He began to suspect that there was something strange about that sequence of positive coincidences that seemed to surround his life since he had started working at the company. But every time he questioned it, she managed to provide plausible explanations that reassured him temporarily. The second twist came a few weeks later when his former boss from the auto repair shop showed up at the company where he now worked. The man was clearly drunk and began shouting false accusations in the main lobby, claiming that he had stolen tools when he was fired months before. The situation was embarrassing and potentially dangerous for his new career, especially because several important people from the company witnessed the scene. The millionaire watched everything from afar, feeling a fury that she didn't know she was capable of feeling. That same night, she activated her most influential contacts in the city. The former boss lost his job at the shop 2 days later when the owner discovered that he was diverting parts for parallel sale. His reputation in the automotive sector was ruined when several of his former employees felt encouraged to report his abusive and illegal practices. In a week, he was completely banished from the region's job market. When he learned that his problems with his former boss had been resolved so definitively, he was surprised but relieved. Again, she managed to convince him that it had just been a coincidence, that people like that former boss always ended up exposing themselves eventually. But he began to notice a strange pattern. Whenever he faced some difficulty, the solution appeared almost miraculously, and she was always around when that happened. During this period, the romantic tension between them had become almost unbearable. They worked closer and closer together, stayed late at the office developing projects that could easily be completed during normal business hours, and created excuses to meet on weekends, claiming urgent work needs. The little girl had become deeply attached to Daddy's work aunt, as she called her, and always asked when they could visit her or when she would come over for dinner. The breaking point came on a rainy Friday when they were alone in the office finalizing a report. The electricity was unstable due to the storm, and they were working only with emergency lighting. When he got up to get more coffee and she made the same movement at the same instant, they collided gently near the coffee machine. The physical contact was like an electric shock that ran through both of their bodies. For a moment that seemed eternal, they stood still, very close, breathing the same air, feeling the warmth emanating from each other. He raised his hand and gently touched her face, and she closed her eyes, lost in the sensation of finally being touched by someone who saw her as a woman, not as a powerful businesswoman. When he leaned in to kiss her, she almost completely surrendered to that moment she had imagined hundreds of times. But at the last second, the reality of the lie she was living hit her like a punch to the gut. She pulled away abruptly, mumbled an excuse about being late for an appointment, and ran out of the office, leaving him confused and hurt. That night, she cried for the first time in years, realizing that she had fallen madly in love with a man who didn't know her true identity, and that when he found out the truth, he would probably hate her forever. He stayed home all weekend, replaying every moment of that almost kiss, trying to understand what he had done wrong, why she had run away like that. The little girl noticed that her father was different, quieter and more thoughtful, and tried to cheer him up with her drawings and innocent games. When Monday came, he was determined to talk to her and find out if he had misinterpreted the signs he thought he had received, or if there really was something special between them that deserved to be explored. The following Monday, he arrived at work, determined to clarify what had happened that rainy Friday. All weekend, he had replayed every moment, every look, every word exchanged between them, and he was sure that he had not imagined the deep connection that existed. He looked for her all morning, but found out that she had travelled for work at the last minute and would only return the following week. The feeling of emptiness he felt was disproportionate for someone who was supposedly just a work colleague. During her absence, he began to notice details that had previously gone unnoticed. The way other employees spoke about her with a respect that bordered on reverence, as if she were much more important than a simple human resources employee. The clothes she wore, always elegant and clearly expensive, although she tried to disguise it with simpler pieces. The way she knew details about the company that an employee in her position theoretically shouldn't know. When she finally returned, there was something different in her behavior. She seemed more distant, more formal, as if she were fighting against something internal that was consuming her. They barely managed to have a private conversation throughout that week, and when he finally managed to ask her out to lunch, she politely declined, claiming overwork. His frustration grew every day, especially because he realized that she was also suffering from that forced separation. The third twist exploded devastatingly on a Thursday afternoon. He had left work early to take his daughter to the pediatrician for a routine checkup, and when they returned to the company to pick up some documents he had forgotten, he saw a scene that changed everything. A luxurious limousine was parked in front of the main building of the corporation, and she was getting out of the vehicle, wearing an executive suit that cost more than he earned in 6 months. Hidden behind a column, he watched as she was greeted by the highest directors of the company, how they bowed slightly in her presence, how they treated her with a deference that was only reserved for the owners of the business. One of the executives handed her a folder with documents that clearly required her approval, and he realized with his stomach churning that he was seeing the true identity of the woman he had fallen in love with. The little daughter, who had recognized Daddy's work aunt, ran towards her before he could stop her. The expression of panic on the millionaire's face when she saw the child was the final confirmation that everything had been an elaborate staging. She bent down to greet the girl, but her eyes desperately searched for him among the people circulating through the entrance of the building. When their eyes finally met, the distance of 20 yards between them seemed an insurmountable abyss. He saw in her eyes a mixture of shame, fear, and love that confirmed that her feelings had been real. But that didn't diminish the devastating feeling of betrayal that consumed him. He picked up his daughter and left without saying a word, ignoring her cries calling his name. The confrontation happened the next day when she showed up at his apartment at night. His daughter was already asleep, and he greeted her at the door with a coldness that she had never seen before. For an entire hour, she tried to explain that her feelings were genuine, that she had fallen madly in love with him, that the whole staging had started as an impulse to help someone who had touched her heart in an unexpected way. He listened to her in silence, but the pain of humiliation was too great to be overcome only with explanations. He felt used, manipulated, as if all his struggle for dignity and independence had been transformed into an elaborate game for the entertainment of a bored millionaire. When she finished speaking, he simply said that he couldn't trust someone who had built an entire relationship on a lie, and asked her to leave his life forever. The following months were hell for both of them. He resigned the next day, refusing to accept any benefits or compensation that might have come from her. He returned to temporary jobs, moved with his daughter to an even more distant neighborhood, and flatly refused to accept any help that he suspected might have originated from her. The little girl constantly asked about the pretty aunt, and he saw his daughter's suffering without knowing how to explain that that person had disappeared from their lives forever. The millionaire, in turn, discovered that having billions in assets meant nothing when one was heartbroken. She liquidated part of her investments in bitcoins and stocks to create a fund that would guarantee the girl's future, but made a point of structuring it so that he would never discover the origin of the money. She spent sleepless nights thinking about him, imagining how they were managing, if the little one was okay, if he had managed to find a job that would give him the stability he deserved. During this dark period, she also began to question her entire life of privilege. She realized that she had become a cold and calculating person who used her power to manipulate situations without considering the feelings of the people involved. The experience of falling in love had awakened in her a humanity that had been buried under years of ruthless business decisions and superficial relationships based only on mutual interest. The reunion happened 6 months later, completely unexpectedly and devastating. The little daughter had had a relapse of the illness that had taken her to the hospital months before, but this time the symptoms were more severe. He was desperate, working 3 shifts to pay for the treatment, but the doctors at the public hospital said that she needed more sophisticated exams that were only available in private clinics. That's when he made the most difficult decision of his life. He took his daughter to the same hospital where they had met, hoping to get the care she needed, even if it meant going into debt for the rest of his life. Fate had it that she was there at that exact moment, visiting the pediatric ward as part of her philanthropic actions that she had intensified since he had left her life. When she saw them in the hallway, with the girl pale and feverish in his arms, all pride and resentment disappeared instantly. She ran to them, completely forgetting where she was and who might see her. And for the first time in months, he saw in her eyes the same woman he had fallen in love with, not the cold businesswoman he had discovered her to be. The little girl, even sick, smiled when she saw the pretty aunt and stretched out her little arms to her. At that moment, seeing the genuine despair in the millionaire's eyes and remembering how she had always treated his daughter with sincere affection, he understood that the love she felt for both of them was real, regardless of all the lies and manipulations. During the 12 hours they spent at the hospital waiting for the test results, they finally talked for real. She admitted that she had hidden her identity because she feared that he would be interested in her only for money, that she had grown up surrounded by people who saw her only as a source of benefits. He confessed that his anger had been caused more by the wound to his pride than by anything she had done, that he had been cowardly in running away instead of fighting for the love they knew was real. When the girl woke up and saw the two of them together by her bed, her radiant smile was the catalyst they needed to forgive each other. She promised absolute transparency from then on. He promised that he would never again let pride destroy their happiness. They sealed that pact with a passionate kiss that was interrupted by the little patient's joyful giggle. A year later they were married in a simple but moving ceremony, surrounded only by their closest friends and the employees of the company who had witnessed the growth of that improbable love. She had redistributed much of her fortune, keeping only enough to live comfortably, and he had accepted a position as director in one of her companies, where he could use his intelligence and dedication to make a difference in the lives of other employees, as he had been one day. The little girl, now healthy and radiant, had finally gained the mother she had always dreamed of having, proving that true love can overcome any barrier when people are willing to fight for it with honesty and courage. If you liked this wonderful story, please comment giving a rating from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and if you love beautiful stories, subscribe to my channel. I promise to make your day better with my videos.